This is the Data Download, your guide to upping your game when it comes to managing and accessing data in your organization. For Collibra, I'm your host, Jay Militscher. I'm joined today by Martin Weyrich from PricewaterhouseCoopers to help us navigate through the world of ESG. Martin, thank you and welcome. Could you, give us a brief introduction to yourself? Maybe tell us your role at PwC.
I'm a partner based in Frankfurt, and I'm located in the consulting practice within PwC and helping my clients to basically cope with all the new requirements, but also opportunities that the sustainable finance and ESG topic brings along with all the challenges that we also need to overcome. So interesting topic and happy to be here.
Sustainable finance. Excellent. Thank you. All right. So why don't we just get started with the basics? Can you define ESG for us? What does that acronym stand for?
It stands for environmental, social, and governance, and includes a lot of things around climate, biodiversity, and how we consume energy and what we can do better from an environmental perspective, but also from a social standpoint, like what are equal opportunities, human rights, health and safety, a lot of things that are associated with these topics. And then, of course, governance. What's good governance? How should boards be composed? What are diversity quotas, compliance topics, and also shareholder democracy? So a lot of topics that are needed also from an organizational standpoint to deal with all those topics.
There are some regulations around ESG. Much of that is really driven formally coming out of Europe in your region. You're in Frankfurt, Germany, correct?
Yes, I'm based in Frankfurt.
So there is some early regulation coming out or recently released in Europe around ESG. Can you kind of summarize for us where those regulations stand? Maybe is it for a specific industry or is it all industries? Tell us a little bit about the regulatory aspect of ESG.
Here on the European side, we have already committed from a political standpoint to certain targets that we want to achieve as a region by 2030. And one of the helpers, let's say, in order to achieve those targets is also that there's a new regulation required that influences different sectors to a different degree in order to support the political will to achieve certain reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, but also the mix, how we produce and use energy, that we move towards more renewables, and also the way how we present certain transparencies for different corporate figures and information, but also on product levels. And what we see here on the European side, that the regulators started very early with the financial services sector, because it's also around orientation of capital flows. The political landscape soon realized that in order to achieve all the targets and ambitions, they are basically required to include also the financial services sector in order to reallocate capital for all the new sustainable projects and investments that we need in order to achieve the targets. So therefore, a lot of regulation in the beginning focused for financial services, but we also then realized that in order to achieve those requirements from a banking or asset management or insurance perspective, you also need information from your investee companies where you invest in or where you hand out loans to. And therefore, also those companies are now in future required to basically disclose more information, which are not only financial information, but also non-financial information. And there's now also regulation around what you need to disclose in addition. What is your, for example, climate path that you would like to work against, certain ambitions regarding reduction of greenhouse emissions. So it's starting for financial services, but we also see it now evolving towards other sectors and other industries.
So you said you started off by saying that we came to a political realization first, and then regulation followed.
Yeah,
and it's mostly starting out of the financial sector, but it's that regulation coverage is also expanding as well.
Yes.
So what's important for me and exciting for me is some of it is, let's say, complying with regulations, but this one feels different, right? This feels like it's not just regulation for regulation's sake. It's not just bureaucratic. It's it is meant to make the world a better place, right?
It is. And I think it's also that a lot of my clients see not only a regulatory burden, but also a huge it's a chance in order to contribute to a better, healthier planet or society from different perspectives. And it also moves away that in the past, a lot of focus was only on complying with the regulations or what is the cost of a certain product. And now it's also around impact and can we influence the world from different dimensions with our services and goods that we produce or financial products. And what is the impact that we kind of leave behind while producing those products? And therefore, I think the dimension has broadened. It's not only doing a tick box exercise from a regulatory perspective, but also thinking out how can my products and my services help contribute to the overarching goals that we have all set. And of course, they are shaped and designed by certain political, let's say, guidelines and strategic ambitions. But we also see a lot of purpose-driven developments within the different sectors that people really understand we can contribute and do something different than we did in the past and make that also transparent to the public.
Regulation is helping companies to sort of encourage companies to let's say do the right things with respect to environmental impact, et cetera. But companies that are regulated are also seeing this as a chance to make a better impact on the world, and they see it as their opportunity also. I think that's what you said earlier. So I think that's great. What's the substance that this is giving to us, this focus on ESG, to make it more than just a PR statement on making an impact, but an actual impact? Tell me about maybe are there measures that are being published that we can take advantage of to see?
It's a very interesting question. I think we've also seen different phases of evolution in the past years. Let me start by a lot of companies in the beginning thought this might be something where you kind of do a PR trick and gain a lot of publicity and position yourself as a leader in the field of ESG because you have done it already for a number of years, and rather use it as a marketing instrument. But soon after kind of seeing that the rest of the market and the different sectors was kind of moving in the same direction and everyone had some kind of a vision to become better in the ESG topics and to make products more sustainable in whatever way it was possible, they soon realized that there's also a lot of public transparency that's being enforced by regulators, but also from, let's say, clients, investors, and associations, interest groups asking questions. Okay, can you really live up to the standards that you put on your website, put into different prospectuses? And is it more than just marketing? And given the developments of the past years, we really observe that the risk of mislabeling and putting something out into the marketing window and saying, well, we are better than we actually are, and what we can then also prove afterwards is also a risk from a corporate or organizational perspective, because in the financial market, the so-called greenwashing risk that you mislabel and market something which isn't as sustainable as you claim it to be. Is also a huge risk from a reputational perspective. And firms not living up to the standards are being also punished for mismanagement in that area. I think there have been plenty of examples in the past years that corporates are now much more, let's say, reluctant to overpromise and do actually more marketing than they can live up to, compared to maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, where it was less that the regulators, but also the public, would be in a position to measure. And also, that was one of the questions, and also to kind of get a real sense, how good is it what you do in the terms of sustainability? And what we now observe, the regulations help because they define also standards and certain metrics that make it more comparable across different players, across different industries. Of course, we have the challenge that in the global setup, we still have regional differences, and some areas like the European landscape, for example, is already matured in some areas more than other regions. But it's not only that the Europeans have developed things. There are also other regions, like in the US, you might be still a bit more advanced in some areas, for example, regarding diversity and what it means compared to what we define here on the European side. So I think this is something where we can all learn from each other in the different regions, but it's still that I think we are further developing certain standards and metrics. And in that development, we will still see that some firms will overpromise and some others will be a bit more reluctant. But I think it has already reshaped from being very vocal, very marketing driven to more let's first produce substance and then be vocal about it.
So my follow-up to that, maybe it's a little too soon to have an answer for this yet, but I wonder if there is reputational hit that a company takes for, I think you called it green labeling, misrepresenting their impact. I wonder if the market is telling, if that's the measure, right? Are their sales numbers reduced? Is that reputation actually making a difference to their top line? I wonder if is it too early to know?
It's a bit too early to know. There are some examples where you could see a decline in stock prices when there was certain information coming to the public that there was mislabeling happening, or at least also it was claimed that it was happening. And that is always a difficult debate because it's a very complex topic how to measure certain characteristics in the field of sustainability. But I think it's too early to see. And also there will be differences across the different sectors. Now, I focus a lot on financial services, but also outside financial services, where less regulation is currently already applying. You see different nuances and different, let's say, focus areas where the corporates are investing heavily into sustainable topics. So therefore, I would say it's still a bit early to really tell the impact of mislabeling and kind of overpromising across all sectors.
It's a journey, and this is relatively new as a formal discipline. So you mentioned the U.S. I wanted to ask a couple of questions here. So a lot of what we talked about so far is environmental impact oriented, the E part of ESG, but I think G matters too. And the NASDAQ stock exchange now requires, or has just recently begun requiring companies to report on and the diversity of their board of directors. And I think in a couple of years, they're going to start requiring a certain number of a certain percentage of their board to be diverse. Is that a good example of other aspects of this that aren't environmental?
Absolutely, and I think this governance piece, how a board should be diversified, is a great step. And on the one hand side, you could argue like, why does it need regulation in order to do that? Because and we experience that also in our teams, if you have diverse teams, it improves overall team performance. And you should think there is an intrinsic motivation by a lot of corporates to really have diversified views also on the top levels within the boards. And on the other side, you can see evidence that in the past years, we have not moved as fast into that direction that we are always diversified. And therefore, it's a great step. In some cases where I said we can always learn from other regions. And this is clearly something where US is leading, because how you define what is diverse, it's not just male, female. And this is clearly something where the European side is still needing to catch up with the US, because we don't have that detailed discussion yet. What we define, how should a diversified board look like? It's a lot of focus on only male, female, and maybe age, but not the other diverse elements.
Right. Look, I think it's huge. It ensures that there's representation in leadership positions, and I think that visibility makes a career path to the top visible for others who might want to seek that kind of growth in their careers. So it's not just in helping boards to make decisions in a wider, more diverse way. It's also something that pays it forward for an entire generation who are watching boards become more diverse, so that others can see a path for themselves as they grow.
And I think one interesting element about that new rule is that you have that transition phase where you can kind of explain why you don't comply.
Right, right.
And in that area, firms are being forced to really have that discussion, that debate, like, why aren't we living up to that standard? And I think that triggers a lot of interesting internal debates within the organizations. So it's not just presenting something towards the public and making something transparent on the website or in a periodic disclosure, but also having that internal debate, why not? And what is hindering us? What's the limiting factor to be more open and to be more inclusive for all the different diverse elements that you could include when you compose a board?
Yes, and if we're trying to make systemic change and make change become the new habit, then just encouraging that conversation within a company is the start of that, right? Even if they can't comply on day one, they have to describe why, and that forced conversation just begins. Maybe it even starts awkwardly for for that company, but by acknowledging it, they can start dealing with it.
Absolutely right. I think it's also to be realistic that there can't be like a big bang where you change everything at once. So it's more about also defining a plan and defining a transition towards the ambition and to the goals that you set, and to start basically a journey to change and to be open about it, to align on the targets, and then make that also public and make it subject to debate. And I think that that's something where the whole ESG topic and then the diversity element is just one element, is really helping to spark discussions and to get corporations and leaders thinking what you can really do differently in order to contribute to the overarching goals.
Yeah, it's really healthy. It's very encouraging. We talked a lot about E, and we talked a bunch about G. Let's talk about S, social. What do you see as the current focus on that? Is it let's say a company's fairness and compensation practices? Like tell us more about the S. Let's get into that a little bit.
This is something, as you rightly say, that's now following the strong focus on the E element. And here, to give you some insights, what we discussed currently on the European side, we had a lot of debate. What is the syntax? How do we define what is sustainable from either an environmental perspective or a social perspective? And what the regulators have now come up with is a hundred of pages long document, so-called taxonomy regulation, where they define what is the taxonomy in order to make the differentiation whether an economic activity is sustainable or not. And we started off with a lot of environmental elements, but now we are in a current phase where drafts are being published and subject to review and commenting phases for the industries, in order to define what are good social activities that shall be supported and where the investment should go to, or where you increase the number of loans, and what are things that we want to improve. And human health, safety, human rights. These topics have been always buzzwords in the past when it came to social elements, but now it's taking a notch more detailed in order to define, okay, what is it that you need to do? What are the elements that you need to fund from a bank perspective or from an insurance perspective? What is it that you need to change differently? And we have that current debate. It's not carved in stone. We don't have the final regulation, but we have started the discussion. And what we already observe is a very detailed set of requirements that we will see on the European side from the regulators, which go much beyond what we have seen in the past. And this is now also helping firms in order to really establish new services, new products that not only focus on the E, because that was the strong focus in the past. But now also think out, what can we do to contribute to social? And it's still evolving. I think from a timeline perspective, we will need another couple of years to have that final. But it's clearly on the agenda of the regulators to have that kind of agreed. What do we mean with that, and what are the most common denominators that we should focus on?
And you're saying that that is starting to, even though it's just a conversation right now, where it's leading toward, let's say, I think you said regulators are defining detailed requirements, lowest common denominators. I think that's what I heard you say. That's great, but it's already causing companies to start thinking about new products and services. Did I hear you right there?
Absolutely. And it's also that some of the companies who did not even feel in the past that they would be owner of a sustainable product now realize it's much more than climate. There are also other elements, as you say, ESG. We have other topics as well that they say if we, for example, provide more loans for certain, let's say, labor related topics, which we didn't in the past, where you might not have huge margins in the past, and therefore there was not a lot of focus on. Now you suddenly realize there's another element because you have an impact, you have a positive impact in some areas if you do that, or if you provide housing for certain low income groups. This would be something from a pure economic perspective, maybe something where some of the players would have said, it's not as interesting as some of the other parts of the industry, but now they realize we can link it with impact. And to combine that, it might be then also a positive business case in the end for their stakeholders in order to focus more on social related business activities.
So regulation is helping companies to think about innovation within their own products, or even creating entirely new products.
That's true. On the one hand side, you also have the benefit that when you talk about ESG and you go into the different organizations and corporates, there's a lot of momentum within the workforce, within the staff, in order to really do something differently because they see the purpose and they see really a meaning if they do something differently. And that's completely a change compared to past regulations where corporates would only see it as a burden and kind of an additional cost factor to implement something that the regulators would like to see. But in the case of sustainability, it's different. It's much more purpose-led, and people are much more motivated to do things beyond the pure minimum requirements that might be defined in some of the regulatory texts.
See, that's doing well by doing good, right? That's that all over again. I think that's great to see and hear. All right, so your area of focus is mostly in the financial sector. I think you had told us earlier, but you are starting to see other types of organizations, or let's say you are starting to see this impact all sorts of organizations in other sectors. PwC as a whole, what other sectors are you seeing, let's say, get a focus with ESG, whether it's regulatory or whether it's opportunity based or a mix of both? What comes to mind as, another up and coming impactful example, other sectors?
Almost all sectors are starting to move into the direction that they would like to become more sustainable or produce more sustainable products. So I haven't seen a lot of discussion in the past year with my colleagues who service other sectors where they said it's not an interesting topic for their client base. It is an interesting topic for everyone that we talk to. Of course, as you say, more regulation has kind of triggered the financial services at an earlier stage, so they are a bit more advanced. But we see that also for other let's say, high energy consuming sectors, that they think out how can we change our energy mixes? How can we also reduce direct greenhouse emissions? And because that's also something that's being made public in the future. So we will see also more regulation for large corporates to disclose what is their energy mix, what is their disclosure regarding emissions. And so therefore they are thinking about stakeholders beyond the pure financial KPIs and think, okay, what can we change? And that's a focus that goes across all sectors. We also see, as you said, how can we produce different products or change our production? There we see a lot of focus. What's our supply chain? Is there something that we could optimize to reduce emissions by changing supply chains and also get transparency into the supply chain. So am I sourcing from what kind of partner, and is the partner also living up to the standards that you as a corporate would like to see? This is being pushed in future also from the political side. So we will see more regulations coming towards supply chain and monitoring of the supply chain with regard to sustainability. And that goes beyond basically one sector, that is across all sectors. If you have a certain amount of employees, certain amount of revenues, then you're caught and you need to comply. So therefore, we will see that basically here on the European side across all sectors in the coming years.
Manufacturing absolutely comes to mind, right? That whole process, from an efficiency standpoint, from a supply standpoint, from a energy consumption, waste production, all of those components come to mind. So any company that's manufacturing something is clearly impacted.
Also, the topic around climate risks, that's also a topic that we see across all sectors. So, and there are kind of two sides. Like, one is what's the risk that you are being influenced and that your business model is influenced because of climate? And then on the other side, what's your impact on climate yourself? And how do you measure it? And what's your plan in order to improve and to change also what you have maybe as emission plan, or how you contribute to a certain climate path? And this is something where we see a lot of sectors currently debating and thinking, how could a certain climate path look like in order to contribute to a better environment from a just climate perspective? And energy mix might be just one thing, but changing also production, manufacturing elements, a whole list of elements that are being looked at. And when we look how we support our clients, it's basically starting really from defining ambition and strategies all the way towards how can we actually implement that. And depending on the different sectors, some sectors are more in the first strategy ambition phase. Some others are already much more into the I implement what I have defined a couple of years ago phase. So we see differences, but all sectors are moving in that direction.
What are some of the biggest challenges that your customers face?
The biggest challenge, I twofold. The ones who really focus on the topic and say this is the dominating thing, it's a lot around data, how to get good quality data, either from external data vendors, but also internal key measures and input factors that you need in order to make conscious decisions. So data is a huge topic. But one of the challenges for the topic as such is currently, to be honest, also how is the changing political environment outside the pure sustainable topic. So we see also companies and sectors currently on the European side saying, well, given the Ukraine crisis and inflation that we observe, do we need to maybe focus also on other topics for a moment? And that, of course, is a hindering factor in order to kind of really push the sustainability topic. So I see twofold. Like, the ones who really focus on it, they have a difficulty to implement it and to cope with all the complex different, and in some cases even contradictory requirements, because different regions have advanced to a different degree. And then you have other sectors to say, I have much bigger problems currently for a short time. Let's focus a little bit later on the ESG topics.
Your first answer was a challenge is getting access to data to help this. What data? Can you be more specific with that?
Maybe start from supply chain perspective, to really understand what's the different set of suppliers that you have and what is the different energy consumption, the different, we have differentiations like scope 1, 2, 3. Scope 1 meaning this is direct greenhouse emissions. Then you have also the indirect emissions where you purchase electricity in other forms or in other forms from external vendors. Or you have also upstream and downstream activities in your value chain where you have certain emissions. And to get a full picture, if you produce something, what is it that you would need to link towards that product or service from an emission perspective? That's a difficult, complex question. The other part is if you, for example, you are a bank, you have a large portfolio of loans. Now you need to identify what is that loan in terms of sustainability. Is it something that you can map towards an economic activity that is sustainable? Then you have a different transparency requirement. Or is it something where you say, well, it's not sustainable, which is also okay, but you need to disclose it at a certain point. And to collect that information, to build that into onboarding processes for new clients, for new investors, for new vendors that you onboard. That's something that a lot of companies struggle with. And another set of data which is difficult if you are a company that invests into other companies, be it a fund management company, for example. How do you determine whether a certain corporate is acting sustainable or is a sustainable investee company? So there are loads of data points that you can observe. A lot of the data vendors and data providers are helping.
Right.
But there are also a number of illiquid assets where you don't have public information, where you have, for example, a solar park or a wind park where you produce energy, but this is not a public information. So you need to send someone out to really collect the information, bring it back, and then have a conscious investment decision. And to get that in a much automated digital way, that's a complexity that the industry still needs to kind of cope with and implement.
It sounds like a fairly significant lift to do that kind of you call it sustainable investing. I think you said, right? So non-public data about a target for investment, right, was just going to cause the investor to go and do that research manually, and that's a heavy lift.
Absolutely, and in some cases that really means that you also change your investment process completely, where you need to ask different questions, you need to obtain different information, different data points, and get that in a consistent manner into your systems with a high quality, because afterwards you are being asked by either external auditors, by your own processes, and that's something where we are still in a, let's say, early stage of the implementation, where the market is still maturing, but we are not there yet where we need to be.
Sounds, though, that regulation creates some opportunity to create data sets that track that stuff, right? And as more companies have to comply with these regulations, they may have to publicize and publish that compliance data also, which then makes it easier for the investor in that other example to then consume that data. So it'll catch up with itself, it sounds like, over time, maybe organically in some cases.
Absolutely right. And what we will see also that, as you rightly say, some of the information will need to be disclosed publicly in a certain format. And that makes it then also easier, or let's say more easy, in order to digest if you need that information and data point. Now, currently you're relying on a lot of data providers, which also have their own cost and fee structure. And in future, some of that will move towards public databases and public data clouds that the regulators have defined and where certain information needs to be stored. That in some cases will not be enough. So you will have a mix also where you need to rely on data vendors, external experts that you send to certain data points collections exercises, and you have also public information, and that all being in a hybrid data architecture being combined, and where you need to keep an overview and also a certain quality assured.
What you're describing here is just tremendous opportunity Regulation is driving change, and it's going to move the needle for good. And companies also see the benefit to their own bottom line, top line and bottom line, in doing so. And there are other opportunities, right, for data providers and others to even play a role, and maybe entire new companies and industries get spun up as a result of all of this. This is pretty interesting. So you mentioned the future. I like to ask all our guests to predict the future. Right. So you said this is new, right? This, relatively speaking, this is a pretty new a new world of regulation and change and impact. What is this? Well, no pun intended. But what is this landscape going to look like in 5 years?
I think the topic will be still very high on the priority list of all the leaders. I don't think it's only a nuance for this year. It will stay. I think we have a lot of aggressive timelines within the different regions, what you need to do from a pure political or regulatory standpoint. But then there are also a lot of new market developments where small niche players, fintechs, tech providers move into that field in order to really help to change. And we see so many new players coming up and doing something sustainable or helping old-fashioned industries to become more sustainable in future to help the transition. And I think in 5 years' time, I think we will probably see that we haven't achieved what we aim for from today's perspective, because if you get much deeper into the details, you see that it's complex and it will require a lot of iterations and smaller steps. So I think it's rather a marathon than just like a 5-year sprint. But the topic as such will not go away. My prediction is there will be no sector, no corporate that will not focus on sustainability. There will be a lot of public pressure in order to become more sustainable and transition if you are in a certain sector that is not sustainable from today's definition perspective. And some of the smaller players will struggle with the huge overhead of regulations that will drive the progress for that topic, but at the same time also means that you need people who have the time and also the money to spend to implement those required changes. And that's where some of the smaller players might also understand it's a challenge for them.